Um, Good to see you guys all wearing your Seahawks gear. I was getting a lot of grief for not wearing Seahawks gear this morning, but I got to be honest, I'm just happy to be wearing anything this morning because my whole family ended up in our bedroom, right? So we got this new dog, and it sleeps in our room, and both of our girls wanted to sleep in our room with the dog, and so I'm up at 6 in the morning. It's pitch black. I got kids they don't sleep in a line. They kind of sleep all over, And so I'm tiptoeing around them and the dog, and I grabbed whatever I thought was clean, and I got a cool shirt though this morning. Yeah, I grabbed whatever I thought was clean and went to give my wife a kiss and got full-on dog face. Not cool at all. And then I got here and realized the sweater I had been wearing was full of dog hair. So you missed it. First hour. There you go. We're wrapping up this week a series on parables, which we've been looking at for the last few weeks. And it hasn't been, and it won't be today, just about the parable. It's just as much about the discussion and the interaction that happens around the parable as it is the parable itself. And for those of you, just before we get started, those of you who are leading small groups, you got an email from me this last week asking you to consider starting next week to join us in our 7-week series that starts next week, the 7 Signs of Jesus of Nazareth. So we're going to look at each miracle that Jesus did in the book of John, and we've got study material for you to follow along, make it really easy for you, and we'll all be traveling on the same path, which also allows us to get really strong around our core values of reaching up in worship together and reaching in community. We'll all be in it together. So I invite you to be a part of that. And we've got the slide for the series. That's a Michael Sand original. Michael, if you're in here, thanks. You made Andy cry, which is very cool. So the word parable we've been saying for the last few weeks comes from two Greek words, para and balo. Para means alongside, balo means to throw. It's where we get the word parabolic. I'm not even going to do the mirror thing this week. The word parable really means to throw alongside, and a parable is a story that speaks to something the listener would be familiar with, and it throws it alongside a profound truth, making the story and that truth more understandable and more applicable to the lives of those who are listening to Jesus. So this week, the last parable we're going to look at is found in Matthew 13. Matthew 13, 1 through 3 says this. Later that same day, and we'll talk about that same day, or what happened earlier, Jesus left the house and went down to the shore, where an immense crowd soon gathered. He got into a boat where he sat and taught as the people listened on the shore. He told them many stories. The day that Matthew is referring to here is the day that a shift occurred in the ministry of Jesus. Earlier on this particular day, a man was brought to Jesus who was both blind and unable to speak. If that wasn't bad enough, the reason he was blind and unable to speak was that he was oppressed by and possessed by demons. So it's bad enough that you can't see or speak, but then it's even worse that you're oppressed by demons, and that's the reason. But on top of that, you're also possessed by demons. It's not a good situation. So Jesus heals this man. He commands the demons who were oppressing him and possessing him to leave this guy alone. And as a result, they do, and the crowds witness a miraculous event. And they begin to ask the obvious question. Matthew 12:23. Could it be that Jesus is the Son of David, the Messiah? Could it be that Jesus is, essentially they're asking, could it be that Jesus is the one that we've been waiting for? And their question was right on target, which is dangerous for Jesus, because once again we see the fact that the willingness and desire of the people to anoint Jesus as their king, as their Messiah, doesn't go down very well, doesn't go over very well with the Pharisees and religious leaders. Jesus was, and we've been saying this for months now, Jesus was a threat to their way of life. He was a threat to the religious society that they were in control of. And the Pharisees and religious leaders' power was based on that society, that structure remaining intact. And it was based on everybody following their rules and their meticulous regulations. In that society, there were the haves and the have-nots. The Pharisees were most certainly the haves, and everybody else was some variation of have-not based on, a scale that started to almost have to totally have-not. And that's kind of how it went. Jesus, however, is doing something radical. He's doing something innovative. He's doing something refreshing for regular, irreligious people like us. He's giving them hope. And he's giving them hope by pushing against this legalistic culture, this legalistic society. Because what Jesus is doing is the opposite of what happened in that society. Jesus was elevating the lowly and the outcast. That society would push down the lowly even further, and they would throw the outcast even farther. Jesus was giving hope to notorious sinners. He was giving hope to people of questionable reputation. He was giving hope to those who are known as the people of the land, not worth more than the dirt beneath the feet of the Pharisees. So Jesus was offering prostitutes and tax collectors what had only been available up until this point to the religiously elite. He's offering them access to God, something they thought they could never have, something they were told they could never have, because they could never earn it. So the Pharisees' response to Jesus healing this man of his demon oppression and possession is to say, no wonder he can cast out demons. Jesus himself is from Satan. Oops. Do you want Satan as your Messiah? That's a little harsh, maybe somewhat passive-aggressive, maybe. I don't know. The Pharisees literally don't know what to do with Jesus, so they call him Satan, and they shame the people. Do you really want Satan to be your Messiah? I mean, that's really what they did. They didn't know what to do with Jesus because he didn't fit into any of their religious categories. Jesus doesn't fit into anybody's religious categories. He never has, he never will. He didn't fit into the religious categories of the Pharisees. He doesn't fit into our religious categories. You can't compartmentalize Jesus. He doesn't fit into our compartments, however we try to do it. And so a significant shift occurs here. Jesus has been rejected by those in power, the religious elite, which means he's been rejected then by the entire nation of Israel because the Pharisees controlled the nation. And the nation they were the people he came to save in the first place. So Jesus communicates first that this rejection puts him on a pathway that will lead him to the cross. The Messiah will not be exalted, the Messiah will be executed. And unlike the religious leaders, Jesus, the Messiah, will not demand perfect religious behavior from his people. We said this a lot in the last couple of weeks, that Jesus knows that even in a million lifetimes, we could never behave well enough to earn God's favor. And then if we behaved really well for a really long time, how would we ever know when we arrived at that point at which we've done enough to earn God's favor? We would never know. So it'd be in this constant, I never know, I've got to keep earning, and that kind of stinks. I was going to say another word, but I've tested the words I can use in church enough, so let's go with stinks. So, now I just made you all think that word, so there we go. Okay, so Jesus knows that nobody can earn God's goodwill. Nobody can earn God's favor. Romans 3:23, we're all sinners. We all fall short of God's glorious and holy standard. And because Jesus knows this, he's willing to offer his perfect, sinless life as a sacrifice for us, as a sacrifice for those who can never be perfect enough, who can never do enough good behavior to earn their way into a relationship with God. And in doing so, and going to the cross and sacrificing himself for us, Jesus provides us with everything our souls have longed for. That deep emptiness is filled in a relationship with Jesus. That deep ache of the soul that we can numb with certain things at certain times, but then it comes back, it can only be soothed by Jesus. Second thing, this is I'm going to say first, second, and third 4 times in here, so if you're taking notes, it's going to look messy. Second, from this point, Jesus no longer teaches in the synagogues. He takes his word to the street. He takes his word to the people, goes to the villages. And access to God and to this new radical movement that Jesus has started is now accessible to everyone. To notorious sinners and despicable sinners, to tax collectors, adulterers, prostitutes, and even to Gentiles. And it's offered to every one of us in this room. If you weren't covered in that list, you are covered. This new movement of Jesus is offered to the chosen and the unchosen. It's offered to the important and unimportant who exist outside of God's chosen nation of Israel. All these people who never thought they could have access to God, who were told they could never have access to God, now have access to God through Jesus. Third, Jesus begins to use parables. He begins to tell these stories to reveal who God is and what God's really about, so people whose souls are aching with spiritual desperation can experience, again, the soothing that only Jesus can provide. And by using parables, Jesus, this masterful storyteller, uses real-life scenarios to reveal truth to those whose hearts long for truth and the hope that that truth brought them. At the same time, his parables had the effect of hiding or veiling truth from those who weren't so excited about learning from Jesus. People like the Pharisees and those who had hardened their hearts towards Jesus and who didn't want any part of the radical movement of grace that Jesus had started. But if your heart was open to seeing who Jesus truly was, then the parables Jesus told allowed both the uneducated and the highly educated to grasp what he was saying and then apply it to their lives. That's what church should be like. We should give a message, a good preacher, not somebody else, not me, but a good speaker should be able to give a message that a highly educated person can apply to their lives, and yet so could a kid who's in here who's 7 years old or whatever apply to their lives as well, right? And that's what church should be like. That's what Jesus' parables were like. The uneducated and the highly educated could grasp what he was saying. And so when Jesus told a story about a house built on a foundation of sand, every one of his listeners understood that building their life on something other than God was at best shaky and would probably come down when the storms of life and the waves of life start to pound against it. And rather than telling people simply, hey, don't worry, I have it all under control. You don't have to worry. He did say that, but then he also painted a picture of beautiful lilies in a field and of carefree birds flying in the air. And he said, hey, if your Heavenly Father takes care of these things that are here today and gone tomorrow, these relatively unimportant things, don't you think he's going to take care of you, his child? Wouldn't you think isn't he far more interested in taking care of you, his children? Yes, is the answer to that. So in Matthew 13, Jesus uses the familiar image of a farmer planting his crop to communicate why some people choose to receive what Jesus has to offer and why some people choose to reject what he has to offer. And again, not all of Jesus' parables were easy to understand. They could be confusing, kind of like most of my sermons, right? But unlike me, Jesus did this intentionally. Jesus did it by design. I'm trying to be clear, and I can't do it. But Jesus' point in the parable was to get the listener to think for themselves, to draw their own conclusion. And over the years, what's happened in a lot of churches, I'm not saying this one, I'm just saying in a lot of churches, the church has gotten away from allowing people to think for themselves, encouraging people, not allowing, but encouraging people to think for themselves. We don't trust people to think for themselves, so we tell them what they must think. We tell them what their takeaways should be. We tell them how they must apply certain scripture to their lives, the way we say they should, the way we think they should. And this is one of the major reasons why the church experience falls so flat on so many in our culture. All the work and all the thinking has already been done for them before they get in the room. Here's the worship, here's how it should make you feel, here's the message, here's what you should think about that, and here's how you should apply it to your life. Which is why, like Jeopardy, most of my messages end in the form of a question. You have to come up with your own answer, right? When we do this thing where we think for people and we tell them this is how you should apply it, then rather than being investors, we become consumers. We reinforce the consumer culture by not allowing people in the church to be fully participating in what we're doing here. And we reduce them to consumers whose only choice is whether or not they will buy or not buy what those of us on stage are selling. I would be very skeptical of what I'm selling, by the way, just so you know. And some of you are like, we are. Trust me, we are definitely skeptical. That's right. Tommy's down here is why I sit here every Sunday, Todd, because I'm skeptical. So what we do here on Sunday should move us. It should inspire us to be people of significant impact beyond these walls, right? We can only be people of impact beyond these walls if we've been impacted ourselves, if we've wrestled with what it means to be a follower of Jesus, if we've wrestled with what it is to do what Jesus asks us to do, even when we don't want to, even when it's the hard thing to do, even when the path that we would create for ourselves is much easier. We decide we're going to follow Jesus, and when we do, when we come to our own intimate knowledge of Jesus, a relationship that belongs to us personally and Jesus personally, then we begin to share what's real about that relationship with people outside the four walls. One of the values that we're investing in here as a church is our Reach Up value, and it's worshiping together in community, but it's more than just worshiping together in community. It's also creating sacred space in our lives, finding space during our week to worship God, to have time with God. If we rely solely on the Sunday morning experience to feed us, and I love you if you say feed us, I don't judge. I'm the last person that should judge anybody. But when you say, I want to get fed, I would question that, because again, Jesus said in John 4:34, 4:35, my nourishment is to do the will of the Father. My nourishment is to do the will of the Father. So if we're just getting fed, it's only part of it. Our nourishment, if Jesus' nourishment was to do the will of the Father, so is ours. That's where we get fed. And so we need to create that sacred space in our individual lives where we encounter God personally and intimately. I do this better at different seasons in my life than others. I have a journal, and I use that journal to pray. It's my ongoing conversation with God. It's listening. It's pouring my heart out. It's questioning. Sometimes it's many pages. Sometimes it's one line that God and I have to deal with on any particular day together. I have a book that I didn't bring with me first hour, and I totally butchered the title of it, and then somebody said, do you mean this book? And it was in my bag, so I brought it. So I also use this particular book along with many others, including, and first and foremost, my Bible, should you think anything else. Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton. It's a study of the life of Moses and how Moses struggled through his leadership responsibilities and how he wrestled with God and what he learned in the process. It's a phenomenal book. I've read it multiple times. So it's having things like this and a journal and a prayer time and just your Bible that help develop our personal relationship with Jesus. And we need that. We need that. All that, and I lost where I'm talking about. So some of us are doing fine encountering Jesus on our own, but most of us would say, you know what, I really don't have that sacred space in my life. I don't have time for it. The stuff of life has sucked it out, overtaken it. One of the reasons that speaking of sacred space, one of the reasons we do communion the way that we do, differently than before I got here, is there's something about moving and getting up and coming to a table and looking at somebody in the eye and having them say, this is the body of Christ, broken, not literally, but broken in death for you. And this is the blood of Christ poured out for you so that you can have life. And that's what we'll say to each other in a little while. There's something powerful when you take a spiritual transaction and you add a physical element to it. The physical element doesn't make it any more spiritual, doesn't make it any more real or less real. It just gives it a little bit more power. And it creates a greater depth of community when we do this together. So that's why we do it. And what we do here together must move us to the point that we're inspired by the level of intimacy and love that exists in our relationship with Jesus. So much so that we share what we're experiencing with people around us. Not by handing out information, like here's some paper on how to follow Jesus, but by oozing what we're receiving from Jesus, by oozing love, by oozing grace, by oozing mercy onto people so it gets on them and they can't get away from it. I love that image. We're just overflowing so much that it can't help but get on the people that we get closest to, and they start to experience love and mercy and forgiveness, and their lives may then get transformed, just like our lives have been and are being transformed. We've got to move away from a model that expects those on the platform, those professional Christians like me, leaving it to us. We've got to move away from a model that leaves it to us to make sure that you encounter Jesus. It's not up to us on the platform to make sure you encounter Jesus. It's up to you to make sure you encounter Jesus. We can facilitate it, but it's up to you. And we have to own that. All of us do. And that same principle applies here in this parable. This parable makes us work. It makes us think. It puts the responsibility to respond squarely on our shoulders. We've got to search for the meaning, and we've got to determine how it applies to our life. William Barclay, who I love to quote, as you know, he says, "You cannot tell a person a truth. You can only put them into a position in which they can discover it for themselves. Unless we discover truth for ourselves, it remains a secondhand and external thing. Unless we discover truth for ourselves, we will almost certainly forget it quickly. The parable, by compelling us to draw our own conclusions and to do our own thinking at one and the same time, makes truth real to us and fixes it in our memory." That's why Jesus used parables. The intent of the parable is for the hearer to draw only one conclusion. What do I do with this? How do I apply this to my life? And remember, Jesus is present with us. Every time we get together like this on Sunday morning, he's present. And I believe firmly that every time we get together on Sunday morning, Jesus has something unique for us, or several things unique for us as a church that he wants us to discover together. I also firmly believe that he has something specific and unique for each one of us every time we walk in here on Sunday morning that he wants to reveal to us, something we didn't expect, something we didn't see coming, something we may have stopped looking for years and years ago. And maybe it's something, so maybe you walked in here with issues in your life, issues in your marriage, struggles, pain, whatever, fill in your own blank. And maybe you have, you've determined, I'm gonna go a certain way with this. I'm gonna take a certain path with regard to this issue in my life. Maybe the thing that Jesus has you here today is to redirect your path. Maybe he wants to do something different in your life. Maybe he wants to move you in a way you wouldn't go, except that Jesus is calling you to go there. He's asking you to trust him. What is it that Jesus is asking you to do? What's he brought you here for this morning? Wrestle with it. Write it down. Write several things down. Wrestle with it now, and then later when the Seahawks are beating the Patriots, wrestle with it then, okay? All right. So, I had to say something. So, a farmer went out, here's the parable. A farmer went out to plant some seed. As he scattered it across his field, some seed fell on a footpath, and the birds came and ate them. Other seeds fell on a shallow soil with underlying rock. The plants sprang up quickly, but they soon wilted beneath the hot sun and died because the roots had no nourishment in the shallow soil. Other seeds fell among thorns that shot up and choked out the tender blades. But some seeds fell on fertile soil and produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as had been planted. Anyone who is willing to hear should listen and understand. You had the feeling everybody is going, yeah, what? So here we put ourselves in this setting. Jesus probably didn't begin his day today going, you know what, I'm going to talk to the people about a farmer today. It's probably that they were walking or hanging out or doing whatever, and there's a farmer, working his field over here, and so Jesus uses that real life, thing that's happening and creates a parable out of it. Takes something familiar that his audience can understand and uses it as his launching point for his truth. So Jesus tells this parable of a farmer in his field, but this new method of storytelling that Jesus employs here confuses his closest followers, right? The 12 disciples had no idea. They had no clue what Jesus was talking about. They were like, have ears to understand? Do you guys know what he's talking about? And you? What? We don't know. So later, Mark 4:10, later when Jesus was alone with the 12 disciples and with the others who were gathered around, they asked him, what do your stories mean? What do your stories mean? There are two reasons these guys don't get it. First of all, Jesus changed his style from preaching, essentially, to telling parables. And these guys hadn't caught on yet. They also didn't catch on or understand that being a disciple of Jesus was going to cost them more than they thought, which is another reason why they wouldn't understand some of his parables down the road. These guys wanted all the blessings of a relationship with Jesus, but none of the pain, none of the suffering. That's what I want. I want all the blessings of a relationship with Jesus, but none of the pain and none of the suffering. But life is full of pain. Life is full of suffering. And even in that suffering, there's blessing in a relationship with Jesus. Out of the suffering, there's blessing in a relationship with Jesus. Because of the suffering, there's blessing in a relationship with Jesus. So Jesus explains to his disciples, his confused 12 guys, what he meant. Matthew 13, verses 18 through 23. Now here is the explanation of the story I told about the farmer sowing grain. The seed that fell on the hard path represents those who hear the good news about the kingdom and don't understand it. Then the evil one comes and snatches the seed away from their hearts. The rocky soil represents those who hear the message and receive it with joy. But like young plants in such soil, their roots don't go very deep. At first they get along fine, but they wilt as soon as they have problems or are persecuted because they believe the word. The thorny ground represents those who hear and accept the good news, but all too quickly the message is crowded out by the cares of this life and the lure of wealth, so no crop is produced. The good soil represents the hearts of those who truly accept God's message and produce a huge harvest, 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as had been planted. So in his parable, Jesus identifies two types of hearers, those who accept what he has to say and those who don't. 4 categories in those two types. First, there's a person represented by the hard path. This is the person who immediately and often without question rejects what Jesus has to offer them. Their mind and their soul and their heart are completely closed to the things of God. And there are many factors that lead people to totally reject the life that Jesus offers them. They've made assumptions about God that they can't get over. They've heard things, they've seen things about religion that they can't get over. They grew up in a church and faith for them was not faith at all, but it was all behavioral based. They may be curious about God. They may be curious about Jesus, but they may never fully open up. We've got friends like this. I keep trying to get them to come to church. And if you're watching on YouTube, it's not enough. You have to come here. I'll use shame to get them to come to church. You bet. These guys, they deserve it. Yes, exactly. Tommy has a word. So they will come to church, and I said, hey, come tomorrow. And they're like, it's Super Bowl Sunday. I'm like, church ends 3 hours before the Super Bowl. Make a better excuse. Don't come at me with that weak sauce. Give me something else. So, yes, give me the hot sauce. So, stop, because you're going to take me to a totally different place. All right. So, what am I talking about? Okay. So they may be curious, but they never fully open up, like our friends. I hope they'll open up, because I know they're curious. But we got to get them. We're having great conversations, but they promised to come to church before I leave here, so we'll see. I'll introduce you to all of them. I'll embarrass them like crazy. Then they'll never go to church again. Which takes me to the next reason why people reject Jesus. Fear of being called out by crazy preachers like me. The real fear, though, is that they're afraid that their life is going to have to change. They're afraid that accepting Jesus' offer and all that he is going to change their way of life in such a radical way. It's going to change who their friends are. It's going to take all the fun out of their life. And so they just decide, you know what, I'm going to stay the way that it is and hope for the best in the end. And then finally, there's pride that keeps people from taking Jesus up on what he has to say. You know what, I got this. I can do life on my own. Jesus is a crutch for weak people, man. And they say that. Wiersbe says, there are none so blind as those who deliberately will not see. So this person who rejects Jesus out of hand, this person Jesus says, doesn't appreciate or understand what's being offered to them. So they reject it. And as quickly as they do, Satan comes like a bird to an exposed seed and snatches it away. Second person is represented by the rocky soil. At first, it appears that this person has fully accepted what Jesus offers with passion and enthusiasm, and their life is transformed. But what starts as a promising relationship soon dissipates almost as fast as it began. And Jesus says their downfall is the result of not establishing roots that are deep enough to keep their faith strong when difficult times come. And as a result, they bail at the first sign of trouble, abandoning God and going it alone. And when I read this part of the passage, I'm reminded of how important relationships are, how important it is for us to have community, real community, not just superficial relationships, but depth of community, intimate relationships where we know each other as followers of Jesus. And it's critical that we invest in this community, that we have a sense that we belong here, that we communicate to those around us that you belong here too. You belong here just as much as I do. This is why we're talking so much lately about making disproportionate investments. We want to make a disproportionate or disproportional, however that's supposed to be said, investment in our core values. Reach up, reach out, reach in. We want to invest in those few mission-critical ministries that are anchored to those core values. Things like worship on Sunday morning, things like personal worship, when you're not here. Small groups where we can truly be in community. Student ministry, you guys. Children's ministry, where good things are happening, by the way. I can tell you this, when we've been working on this as a pastoral staff, and we do the whiteboard, and we look at reach up, reach in, reach out, we have quite the opportunity to dream in the area of reach out. We can say there are certain things we're doing that are reach out ministries, but we have to ask the deeper question, are they really reaching out? Are they really making a connection? Or do they just fit into that category? There's a lot of room for us to dream when it comes to reach out. And instead of saying, we're not doing anything to reach out, we don't have room or time for that kind of discussion. What we have time for is, let's dream. How are we going to do this? And how are we going to do it together? Okay? We have a virtual blank slate and reach out. So let's get to work on that. So many times in almost 23 years of marriage, Kara and I have faced some challenges. Mostly she's faced challenges with me. But we've faced stuff that's threatened our family, stuff that's threatened our careers, our faith, our belief system, our willingness to be in church at times. And if we didn't have community, if we didn't have friends, if we didn't have people saying, hey, hang on a second, we may be on the outside. We may be people who've given up on church and have a bitter, hollow, existence that used to have a little religion in it. We may have that get-out-of-jail-free card when we get to the pearly gates that we can show. Yeah, once when I was a kid, I asked Jesus into my heart. I gave up in my 30s, but, here it is. If not for our friends, if not for community, that's where we would likely be. That's definitely a possibility of where we might be. During one of our transitions from Westminster Chapel in Bellevue down to Portland, where I became the lead pastor, we got together with several friends each week, and we would pray each week for each other. We all had different stuff going on in our lives, and we were just committed to praying for each other and telling each other, looking each other in the eye and saying, hey, we're in this together. Even if at the end we all go our separate ways, we are in this together. We all need, if we are a follower of Jesus, even if we're not, we all need community at this level. We all need community where real relationship exists with other followers of Jesus. We need intimate relationships with other followers of Jesus. And what I mean by that is people who really know about us. People who know, those few people who know what nobody else does about us. We need those people. So anyone who says, yeah, you know what, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I'm not buying it, Todd. I don't need community. Anybody who says that, the one thing that's true about them is that they are flat out in denial, okay? We're not wired to survive on our own. We're not wired to be on our own relationally, because that doesn't even make sense. You can't be on your own relationally. There is no relationship. We're not wired to have a relationship with Jesus in isolation. We're not wired to be spiritually alone. Each of us needs community. There's a great picture of community in Acts 2. And all the believers met together constantly. Can you imagine? Be at church every day. Our culture would freak out about that. But all the believers met together constantly and shared everything they had. They sold their possessions and shared the proceeds with those in need. There are people in this church, by the way, who do a version of that, and it's cool. They worshiped together at the temple each day. They met in homes for the Lord's Supper and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their group those who were being saved. There is definite benefit for everybody involved, and even for those on the periphery when we are living true biblical community, living in true biblical community. Third, there are those who represent the thorny ground. Any of us who have ever done any gardening, I said to first service, I should not be talking about gardening. I should have come up with something else other than gardening, because I'm not a gardener. I'm terrible at it. I'm a terrible weed picker. If you're gonna have a good garden in the Northwest, you got to pick some stinking weeds, right? Because they're everywhere. And not only do you have to pick the weeds, you got to get the roots. Did you know that? Yeah. It took me a while to figure that out. So Kara says, hey, can you go out and clean the beds up? I take a rake, Yeah, I do. And, or I'll just go pick the tops off all the weeds, and it looks awesome for about 2 days. And then she goes, what's wrong with you? Because the weeds just come back. So same is true, if you get that analogy at all. The same is true in our spiritual life. We simply can't clear out a little space for Jesus, among all the other things in our life. If we make Jesus just another little area, another compartment, it doesn't work. We can't compartmentalize Jesus. The other stuff of our life will overtake. The other stuff of our life will suffocate the life of our relationship with God. And maybe that's where some of us are right now. Is that all the other stuff, we've tried to have a space for Jesus, just that one little space where we go to him at certain times for certain things, but all the other stuff in our life has suffocated that time and that space and that relationship. Maybe that's where we're at. Fourth, the good news. Those who represent the fertile ground that produce a huge crop. These are the people whose lives have embraced the love and forgiveness and transformation that Jesus offers. Their lives are being transformed. They have been transformed. They're living what I think it's the Message in John says, the more and better life than they could have ever dreamed of. They are the people who are following so closely behind Jesus that they are covered in his dust. That phrase, covered in his dust, or covered in the dust of your master, covered in the dust of your rabbi, that was a phrase of honor used of people who followed their rabbi, their teacher, so closely that they not only learned from him, but they began to teach other people what they were learning from their master, from their rabbi. And if they were doing so, they were known to be covered in the dust of their rabbi. And so people who represent the fertile soil, these are people who are covered in the dust of their rabbi, Jesus. And how cool would it be if you and I were, if we were known by anything else, if we were known to be people who were covered in the dust? Wouldn't that be cool? So these are people who are going wherever Jesus leads them, places they would not have otherwise gone. They're making a difference in the lives of those that they encounter. They are living expressions of Jesus. They are not good Christians because, again, that's an oxymoron. There's no such thing. They're not Bible thumpers or, street corner evangelists. If you're a street corner evangelist, that's awesome. I said, don't be a crazy evangelist first hour. Now I'm saying I'm embracing the crazy. So let's just we all need a little more crazy. So that's okay. But these are they're not good Christians. They're just real people. They're real broken people like you and me. They're sinful people who know what's true about themselves. They know what's true about their lives. And one of the things they know that's true about their lives is that they're sinful and messed up. Another thing they know that's true about their lives is that sin and everything that they've messed up is completely and absolutely covered in the love, mercy, forgiveness, grace, and redemptive work that Jesus did on the cross. All right? There's something compelling about these kind of people. when you get around these kind of people, they do ooze Jesus onto you, onto others. You can't help it. You can't get it off. I was with a friend of mine, Ronnie Harris, on Friday. We had coffee. And Ronnie used to play for the Oregon Ducks football, right? I don't recognize that woo. So he used to play, but we hang out anyway, right? Because we're friends, and it's all about Jesus. But Ronnie's got a problem. He's got a serious problem. He went to Oregon, and the dude wears an Oregon shirt every time I see him. I saw him on Friday. He had Seahawk gear on because he used to play for the Seahawks too, and it was Seahawk Friday. Other than that, the guy has Oregon stuff on all the time. He's got an Oregon hat. He's got an Oregon shirt. He's got Oregon shorts. He's got Oregon underwear. I even went to how I know isn't important. It's just that I know that. So he even, at a retreat for kids that I was speaking at, he even had Oregon duck, what's the stuff you put on a table? Tablecloth, yeah. It's insane. So here's his problem. Besides being a little bit too fanatical about the Oregon Ducks, his daughter chose to go to, wait for it, Wazoo. So now the dude drives around with an Oregon sticker and a Wazoo sticker on the back of his car, and people just shake their heads because they don't understand what dads will do for the love of their daughters, you know. So there you go. But Ronnie is a guy that oozes Jesus. When you're around him, he engages people in conversation, and it somehow almost always turns to Jesus. And a lot of us hear that and we think, oh, that's great, Todd, you know. That's nice. That's just not me. I'm not going to ooze Jesus. I'm going to ooze something. It's not going to be Jesus. We've got a dark side, and we know it. And we're sure that our dark side disqualifies us from full buy-in to this type of community that I'm talking about. And we're sure that our dark side disqualifies us from the deepest level of intimacy with Jesus that I'm talking about. But it doesn't. It doesn't, because God isn't interested in people who can just do good behavior. God isn't interested in people who pursue him by acts of good works in order to appease him and keep him from getting angry with them. God's not interested in people with no blemishes on their record. We all have not only blemishes, but deep scars on our record. God's interested in you. God's interested in me. Brennan Manning, paraphrasing Jesus, says, "Come on, all you who are wiped out," again, this is Matthew 11:28, has to be. "Come on, all you who are wiped out, confused, bewildered, lost, beat up, scarred, scared, threatened, depressed." That pretty much covers us all, doesn't it? "And I'll enlighten your mind with wisdom and fill your heart with tenderness that I have received from my Father. This is unconditional pardon. The sinner need only live confidently in the wisdom of accepted tenderness." Which begs the question, are we living in the wisdom of accepted tenderness? And how long has it been since we've lived in the wisdom of accepted tenderness? If we truly understood God, if we truly understood the God of the universe and his son Jesus, if we truly understood that the love that God the Father and Jesus the Son and God the Holy Spirit have for us, it would blow us away. If we truly understood how God pursues us as though we're the only person in the world, if we truly understood that he loves us as though we're the only person in the world, it would blow us away. It would so radically transform our lives and our way of thinking, and it would do so for the better, and we would never want to go back. And a lot of us have been there. Some of you are there right now. A lot of us are trying to figure out, how do I get back to that? Because I remember that. I remember what it was like when Jesus was everything. And I didn't worry as much. I didn't stress as much. I didn't get as angry as I do. So I like this parable. I like asking the question, at the end every week, where do we see ourselves? Where do you see yourself in this parable? Are you a person who's receptive to Jesus' offer? Maybe for the first time, being receptive to Jesus' offer to enter into relationship with him. Maybe for the first time in a long time, you're ready to be receptive again to Jesus. Are we that fertile soil? I asked the question earlier, what is it that Jesus is saying to you? Well, that question is inextricably linked to the question, are we the fertile soil? And are we willing to let God do whatever he wants to do in the fertile soil of our lives? Are we willing to let him change the direction, the course of our lives, even if we were absolutely determined on a course of action when we came in here? Maybe that's a course we still take, but are we at least willing to let Jesus change that if that's what he needs to do? Can you hear his still small voice calling to you in a thin silence, in a gentle whisper? Listen for it. Listen for it for the rest of the day. Listen for it while the Seahawks are beating the Patriots. Listen for it this week. Don't just check this Sunday off and go, hey, we did church this Sunday, heard something, wrote a couple things down, put it where, I don't know. But there'll be church next week, and so there's something else. God has something unique for you. Don't miss it. It may just be to remind you that he loves you beyond measure. It may be a lot more than that. Though I don't think there is actually much more than knowing that you're loved beyond measure by God, is there? Yeah. All right, we're going to take communion. And we're going to do it the way that we've been doing it since I got here. And that is to come to the table and have somebody look you in the eye, say your name if they know it, and say, this is the body of Christ broken in death for you. This is the blood of Christ poured out for you. We do this to remember that all that Jesus offers is made possible because he went to the cross willingly for us. And there are no rules around communion except that you're a follower of Jesus. I would even say if you desire to be a follower of Jesus. But if you're a follower of Jesus, come to the table and share with us.